Hey everyone, it's great to see everyone here. I'm delighted to welcome you to our HCA Town Hall. There's a lot going on in HCA right now, so the goal of this event is to update you on the recent progress and highlight opportunities to become more involved, and also we saved ample time for Q&A. So if we can have the next slide, please. I'm gonna kick us off with the first part, which is to talk about our recent progress. Sarah is going to take you through some of our upcoming priorities and the events that are going to happen in 2024. And then Chloe is going to wrap up with the HCA data ecosystem updates. And we're going to actually pause after each part for a Q&A. So I'm going to begin with our progress since our last town hall in December. And that includes a little bit of a status report on the first draft of the HCA atlases, what's going on with our publication bundle, and a little bit on how you can get involved. After that, we're going to talk about additional topics, but I especially want to highlight the upcoming HCA General Meeting, which is just around the corner. We're going to give you a little bit of a preview of the program and how it's going to help us refine the roadmap and expand the diversity of the atlas. And just as a heads up, a little later in the talk, there's going to be a QR code that will take you directly to the registration page. There's going to be an early bird discount there. It's lasting through the end of the month, so we encourage you to register as soon as possible. And so if we can go to the next slide, please. Thank you. And so our main headline is that there's been a lot of progress across the 18 biological networks towards the initial atlases. The first two, which were actually published in 2023, were the Lung Atlas, the first one published, and then the really big splash that the Brain Initiative Cell Census Network, or BICCN, made with the nervous system atlases. We've described in the last town hall how these initial draft atlases came to be, and we showed how the HCA data portal was redesigned to facilitate access on the information to these atlases. I just want to remind you that the nervous system atlas has two brain atlases that were produced by BICCN, which is now BICAN, the Brain Initiative Cell Atlas Network. Ed Lean leads HCA's nervous system network, and is also a leader of BICAN, and that really facilitated the crosstalk between these two projects. And then on the lung side, the first version of the atlas, along with the two brain atlases, can be accessed through the HCA data portal, and that includes links to the underlying source data set on Cell by Gene and the HCA data repository. And we work very closely with Cell by Gene to make sure that all the HCA expression matrices are available on Cell by Gene and are linked from the HCA data portal. And the raw data and the full biological metadata are stored on the HCA data repository. This is what was formerly known as the DCP, or the Data Coordination Platform. And so the data portal really bridges these resources, and it provides additional information related to published HCA atlases, including links to publications and code and contact information and so on. So if you go to the next slide, please. Thank you. You can see that these lung and brain atlases were really just the beginning. Now we have continued very actively across multiple others. And so in 2024, currently work in progress, but slated for this year, are the eye, the organoid, the kidney, the gut, the immune, and the breast atlas, all of them being work in progress. And then for 2025, we are already slated with adipose, oral and craniofacial, development, genetic diversity, heart, liver, skin, and more. I want to really acknowledge the extremely hard work of the biological networks getting these atlases together, and in particular, the bionetwork coordinators who are leading these efforts, as well as the HCA computational integration team that's led by Malte Luken at the Helmholtz in Munich, and all the generous funding from the Chan Zuckerberg Initiative that's supporting this project. If you go to the next slide, please. I already pointed out that we have a great portal. The HCA data portal team really helps us connect all of this information together. This is an example of a representative page from the nervous system network, and it is typical for any other network as well. So you can see here what the Atlas page really looks like. So in this case, you can see the links to the various information, and there is a second tab that we can't click because this is not a demo, that really shows you links to all of the source data sets. There's a little bit of a description of the network. There's a title for each of the data set, and you see the volume of the data that are actually included through the portal. And so all of this is available in our portal. If we go to the next slide, when we think about how we create these atlases, we have to be very particular in understanding what are the criteria for release of an atlas. And so the organizing committee, the OC, has reviewed and updated the criteria for approving an HCA atlas. So in our organizing committee, there's about 36 scientists. I happen to be one of them. They come from around the world, and they are really our scientific governing body. We meet every other month for a couple of hours. Each of 2 different time points, and that helps us accommodate all the time zones because the sun never sets in the HCA. And so over the last several months, we really updated these approval guidelines for the new atlases, and I want to highlight the key components. First of all, these atlases are made by the community. And so the members of the relevant biological networks have been involved in the development of the atlas. It can't just show up out of nowhere by one, say, particular group. It has to be this community effort that the biological network stands behind. The second is that we expect the reference to include the studies that are really the landmark studies for the particular organ, tissue, or system. And so these could be seminal recent papers. Sometimes there are data sets that are not yet a paper for the organ or the system in question. The third criterion is that the reference atlas has to be robust. And in particular, we want it to be robust to key technical factors that we would expect to affect atlas quality. Sometimes it's the type of tissue, frozen or fresh, cells or nuclei, the way in which the cells were profiled, the way in which the analysis was performed. We want to make sure that the results are not sensitive to that. And then fourth, to the extent possible, we expect the annotations to be generated with representatives from the previous landmark studies so that we really generate a consensus view across different studies, and that we put in the expert opinion of people who understand the data in the deepest possible way. And then we also expect these annotations to be stored on the HCA cell annotation platform so that they are available, and also so that they can be updated as knowledge grows. And then finally, the fifth criterion is that the integration data, which includes the count matrices and the FASTQ files, as well as the metadata and the code for the end-to-end data analytics pipeline that generated the atlas, all have to be public and accessible. And as I mentioned earlier, the HCA matrices actually live on cell by gene, and the FASTQs live in the HCA data repository. So our goal with these criteria is to set clear and rigorous standards for our HCA atlases. This is, first of all, ensures that we put out a good product, but also that people who consume the atlases, their users, really understand what stands behind them. And we want to do this in a way that recognizes and engages the expertise and the effort that HCA scientists are contributing to the project. And so the key point here is that HCA is not just a collection of individual cell atlases. They have to be aligned, both in format and annotation, in understanding, which is really reflected in those annotations and in what we release, so that we are building a true atlas rather than just a data set aggregation or a study aggregation. This is, as I said, also one of the reasons that it is crucial to really put the annotations in the HCA cell annotation platform, or CAP, because that enables consensus cell type annotation by the HCA community. It's also a living platform, and so new knowledge can really be accrued there and developed and evolved over time. There's going to be more about CAP later on today. Now, for those of you who are coordinators or highly engaged members of biological networks, as your first draft nears completion, the executive office is going to invite you to present your atlas at a meeting of the organizing committee, and if necessary, then any missing information can be collected before we approve the atlas at the next meeting. If you go to the next slide, And so I referred a lot to the biological networks. I know that most of you are familiar with them. They are really the foundation for our Atlas assembly strategy. They are also a major conduit for you to really get involved with HCA. And so there's 18 biological networks. They cover most of the major systems in the body, as well as topics, cross-cutting topics across the different organs, like development, organoids, and genetic diversity. Depending on the network, we have between 150 to 650 scientists from around the world. And they provide a mechanism for broad community input and engagement as we curate data sets and integrate the atlas and annotate cell types. And then next slide, please. And this is the final one for this section. Of course, as we do all of this science, a lot of papers get generated, or a lot of manuscripts get generated. A large number of studies feed into these atlases, and they also generate actually additional studies. There's also been a great deal of work to develop and test new analytical methods, also new ethic tools and approaches in order to ensure equity in the HCA products. And many, many of these studies will be published as a package in the Nature family of journals, likely this coming fall. This is a rough planned date. These papers are making their way. Some have been accepted by now. Some are being reviewed or revised. And so this is a major milestone for HCA. There's 68 papers that have been submitted by now for consideration. Nearly a quarter of them have been accepted, and most of the others are simply in revisions. Most of the papers can be roughly grouped into three categories: analytical methods, developmental biology, and atlas integration. And we're also working on perspectives that would describe HCA's project and plans in each of these areas. We do anticipate that there will be future additional HCA publication bundles, so please contact Ellen Todres in the executive office if you are interested in submitting to a future bundle. And I will also emphasize that the bundle is not actually the draft of the atlases. It's a showcase of the community's work that has mostly led to these atlases that are being integrated right now. So much more to be published, and stay tuned. And with this, I would actually pause here with the next slide. And be happy to pause for us and turn to Sarah for a discussion of the challenges that HCA will need to tackle beyond the initial draft, as well as a preview of this year's HCA General Meeting and other upcoming events.
Thank you, Aviv. Fantastic to see the overview of everything that we've done and everything that's going on in HCA at the moment. If we don't have a whole bunch of questions now, then maybe I'll just continue straight on. We do encourage you to pop your questions into the Q&A box, and we'll aggregate them and then answer kind of in sections. So I'll continue on right here. If we go on to the next slide, please, then we are going to really review basically the expansion of the atlases. And the initial draft atlases that Aviv has summarized represent major achievements for the HCA, but they're really just a start, because much more work remains to be done to transform these initial products into an integrated atlas covering the entire body and representing the full spectrum of human diversity. And the years ahead, we want to see a major push in three areas in particular. First, ensuring that HCA represents the full extent of human diversity, including age, gender, geography, and ancestry. And multiple groups within the HCA community are coordinating to develop recommendations and best practices for expanding the diversity of our atlases, including the Genetic Diversity Biological Network and a new diversity task force that's been established by the HCA Equity Working Group. Secondly, we want to move forward in mapping cells in 3 dimensions across all tissues, organs, and systems in the body. And that will notably involve the incorporation of much expanded spatial data into the atlases, and as well, of course, development of new computational methods for analysis and integration of that spatially resolved data. And that effort will also include filling in anatomical gaps that remain from our initial set of atlases. Third, last but not least, we want to continue to build querying and visualization platforms that are free, open, and equitably accessible worldwide to eliminate geographic and resource barriers to accessing and using the Human Cell Atlas data. And each of these three objectives will require significant innovation, investment, and planning. And our goal is to engage the entire HCA community in developing a roadmap for success and in moving this project forwards then into the next stage along these three pillars that you can see here. Next slide, please. Next, we want to go on to talk about the next general meeting, because these future priorities, particularly with respect to diversity and equity, as well as the incorporation of spatial data and other data types, will be the focus of the 2024 HCA General Meeting, which will be held on September 29th and 30th in Milan, Italy. We're incredibly excited to be partnering with Piero Carninci and his colleagues at Human Technopole to organize this meeting, and deeply grateful for their hard work as well as the efforts of the HCA Executive Office in putting the meeting together. Yeah. So registration, is there another slide on this meeting? Or is this? Yeah, here we go. Registration is currently open, and the QR code on this slide will take you to the registration page. As Aviv mentioned, the early bird rate is available through end of the month, and we hope that you'll take advantage of it. And if you're unable to make it to Milan, virtual participation is also an option. And as always, the presentations will be posted to our YouTube channel following the meeting. I should also note that there are reduced or no cost registrations available for trainees, as well as for scientists from lower income countries. And any questions can be addressed to the Executive Office at meetings@humancellatlas.org. This slide also shows some of the session topics, including the state of HCA atlases, incorporating spatial data, diversifying the atlas and how to measure this, cross-tissue integration querying, planning for the next phase of HCA applications of foundation models. The program will include several breakout discussions where we'll ask for your input on HCA's future priorities and goals, including on the topic of diversity, where we'll be discussing the recommendations being generated by the Diversity Task Force. And these sessions are an excellent chance to help shape the future of HCA, and we're excited about your input going forwards. If we go on to the next slide, we want to say, also give a shout out to the companies and organizations that have provided sponsorship. The meeting simply wouldn't be possible without their support. Next slide, please. Yeah, many companies will be attending the meeting and will have booths in the exhibit hall, and they'll also be presenting during 2 technologies showcase lunch sessions. And both the exhibit booths and the talks will be a great way for you to learn about the new technologies and products in single cell and spatial omics. And we're working hard at planning numerous other meetings and workshops as well. If we go on to the next slide. Later this month in Bangkok, we'll convene the latest in a series of highly successful computational experimental design training programs that have been organized with generous funding from the Chan Zuckerberg Initiative. And the Bangkok workshop will be held in collaboration with Mahidol University, and we're truly grateful for this fabulous partnership. Capacity building workshops such as these are an important contributor to building an equitable and diverse atlas, and we hope to be able to expand these activities further over the next few years. And on the next slide, we have our Latin America Symposium at the end of July. We'll have a symposium organized by the HCA Latin America Regional Network. And this will be a hybrid meeting with in-person participation simultaneously at 3 sites in Brazil, Mexico, and Chile, and virtual participation as well. Registration is currently open and open to the entire HCA community. On the next slide, in December, we'll have this year's HCA Asia annual meeting hosted by Angela Wu and her colleagues at the Hong Kong University of Science and Technology, and registration for that will open later this year. We go on to the next slide. just to emphasize that each of these events is an opportunity to recognize, convene, and expand our research communities in every region of the world, and to support our global membership, which remarkably now includes over 3,400 people in 101 countries. This expansion really speaks to the sustained interest and enthusiasm for the project across the broad scientific community, and bodes well for our efforts to build an atlas that fully represents human diversity. In the next slide, we are very fortunate that our community enjoys excellent support from the HCA Executive Office, which has professional staff based in the UK, US, Japan, and Singapore. And I encourage you to reach out to the HCA staff at any time if you have any questions about any aspect of HCA. So you can see the faces and names here. We've had great support for organizing this event. And on the website, there's information about who's responsible for which component of the executive office support. On the next slide, there's information about our policies and procedures, which the executive office has been working to support and also improve the accessibility of the information on the HCA website. They've recently created a new webpage to collect all the HCA policies and procedures in one place. And that includes general policies, such as our code of conduct or local use guidelines in the HCA white paper. It includes resources related to ethics and equity. It includes policies on the use of HCA data, including an updated policy on unpublished data that will be posted shortly, and updated instructions and best practices for data submission and the assembly of HCA atlases. The last item on the list is an SOP for Atlas assembly that we're currently putting the finishing touches on, and in a few minutes, Chloe Villani will take you through the purpose and components of that SOP. If you go to the next slide, we also have on this policies and procedures webpage a link to information on commercial discounts that are available to HCA collaborating members. So if you're working on a project that's actively contributing to HCA, you can contact these companies to request the HCA discount on equipment and reagents. We're seeking to expand this program and will continue to publicize these discounts as more companies are added. And the next slide, please. We'll pause again here to answer your questions and leave up this slide with information on how to join HCA and sign up for one or more of our biological networks. And I can see that we now have some Q&A. I don't know if we want to stop here or go straight on to Chloe and then take all of the questions.
We can certainly do that, Sarah, if that's easier. A lot of the questions in the panel can be answered by encouraging all of you to engage with your bio-network of interest. And we should highlight that you're not limited to joining a single bio-network. If you have interest in multiple bio-network, you can join as many bio-network as you wish and engage with them in the different activities of Atlas assembly and notation. Should we proceed with the next slide?
Yeah, we'll do that. We'll answer in the typing answers. Okay. Over to you, Chloe.
Sounds good. I am delighted to give you an update on our improvement to our HCA Data ecosystem today. Next slide, please. The process of assembling atlases across bio-networks over the last year and a half or so has been really helpful in identifying different ways we could improve and better streamline our data ecosystem to facilitate and better support the HCA community in building the next versions of atlases. At the last general meeting in Toronto, we presented several lessons learned derived from the HCA Atlas Assembly journey last year, and several groups have since been working together to develop and implement solutions across the HCA data ecosystem to tackle challenges that had been identified. And I'm going to cover some updates across three key important features of our ecosystem, including the metadata, our coordinated data ingestion process, and managed access. Next slides. We'll start with the metadata schema, which was one of the earlier questions posted today. So for example, over the last year, several groups have come together to update our metadata schema, implement standardized file format across all HCA data ecosystem, and generate detailed documentation that will be released later this summer to better support the community. Why is this needed? Standardized metadata schema and standardized file formats are critical not only for the current Atlas assembly effort within every organ system and help define these batch covariates that need to be assessed for Atlas evaluation. These fields are also very critical to support the future integration effort across tissues to achieve an Atlas of the entire human body and help promote rigor and reproducibility of our HCA atlases. Furthermore, aligning our metadata fields and file formats will help support all downstream biological queries, future methods development, software development, and portals to navigate the data and support biological queries. We have regrouped the metadata around 3 groups that are listed at the bottom that I'll spend a moment describing, which are tied to 3 distinct teams working together to coordinate the data wrangling and help support Atlas assembly that I'll describe next. The first group of fields include 40 fields that we under the umbrella of Tier 1 that are uniformed across all bio networks. These capture technical and broad demographic fields that can capture batch covariates and can be leveraged to assess the effectiveness of data integration within an organ system and eventually across organ system. These fields don't have identifiers and are meant to be accessible in the public domain once an atlas is released. Second, we have an updated Tier 2 schema that includes fields that are specific to tissue, specific to bionetwork and disease, as well as ancestry fields, metadata that are common to all bionetwork. Importantly, these fields can be managed, accessed, and the HCA Data repository team is working with every bionetwork to tailor these metadata to the bionetwork specific needs. Together, these fields are meant to help support the downstream biological queries of atlases. Finally, we have 10 cell annotation metadata fields that are key to help support rationalizing cell type identity across source datasets and integrated atlases. Compiling these cell annotation metadata is key to support atlas assembly and help the community eventually derive consensus annotation across organ system to future Jamboree efforts that will enable leveraging this metadata that I'll cover in next slides. I want to stress that many people across the HCA communities and partners have been involved in defining and updating the metadata schema and standardizing file format, including members of the ongoing integration team, bionetwork coordinators and champions for their communities, members of the analysis working group, as well as members of the data ecosystem oversight group and the organizing committee. We've also been working very closely with the CZI cell by gene team, the HCA Data repository team at EBI, and the cell annotation platform team to coordinate the definition of these fields, align with their existing schema and file format, in addition to extending them. This has been a 10-month process, and we now have detailed documentation, as I mentioned, will be released later this summer. To help support the wrangling and accessibility of these 3 different groups of metadata, we have reorganized our HCA data ingestions as follow. Next slide, please. The process of coordinated data ingestion starts at the very left of this cartoon. It entails bionetwork coordinators working with their respective bionetwork community and their integration team involved to first define landmark studies and data sets that should be included in Atlas assembly. With the support of the HCA Executive Office, bionetwork coordinators and their champions then reach out to data contributors with requests for collaboration on Atlas assembly, as well as instructions on file format and metadata needed for every dataset, as well as contact information for the next steps of their ingestions, along with documentation. Then the 3 different types of metadata I just described are assembled across the 3 pillars of our HCA data ecosystem, which are supported by 3 amazing teams that all work together with the coordination of the HCA Executive Office. These teams have staff dedicated to support data ingestion related to Atlas assembly, and they include first at the very top in green, the CZI cell by gene team that supports the matrix store and Tier 1 metadata schema specifically designed for HCA. The second box is the cell annotation platform team that leverages the matrices ingested by cell by gene to then work with data contributors on gathering the cell annotation metadata. And finally, at the bottom, in Aqua, the HCA Data repository team that supports the ingestion of managed access data, including FASTQ files and tier 2 metadata that one would need for biological queries. These 3 different types of metadata must be wrangled across every source data sets that are integrated in an atlas for an atlas to be approved by the organizing committee, as described by Aviv in earlier slides. Once the atlas is assembled, access to the atlas along with the different source data set included in the atlas and all this metadata will be accessible, I should say, available through the HCA Data portal shown on the far right. Next slide, please. Next, I would like to update you all on our HCA Managed Access program. After 7 years and a half of hard work involving HCA ad hoc task force together with funders and law firms and many other champions, we have successfully built our managed access system that in theory can enable data sharing from anywhere in the world. It gives the bio network the capabilities and freedom to work with contributors and datasets from around the world to create a more thorough and diverse atlas, which is one of our key HCA Atlas expansion priorities that Sarah described. I want to take a moment to acknowledge that this is a critical accomplishment and milestones for HCA and congratulate the team that made this happen. The priority for the managed access system is to help support centrally storing data tied to source data sets being included in Atlas assembly effort across organ system. This includes, for example, the raw FASTQ files, which need to be stored to future-proof the atlas in the event that we need to go back to raw data for future analysis. We can also store detailed biological and disease and ancestry field. The International HCA Specific Data Access Committee is in place, and the Managed Access Service is now in soft launch. We selected a small group of contributors in different circumstances to stress test the system, and we are currently working with contributors from Thailand, Japan, and South Africa as part of this soft launch. Next slide, please. Since the Toronto meeting, a team has also been working towards developing a more detailed Atlas Assembly Standard Pairing procedure, which is meant to support BioNetwork and the integration team in achieving the criteria for Atlas approval by providing a detailed roadmap of how to achieve and meet these criteria. The strategy included in this document are meant to help promote rigor and reproducibility of Atlas assembly. It is important to remember that the goal of HCA is not to produce independent atlases. Our Atlas assembly effort goes beyond this initial wave of doing individual organ atlases, as we already need to plan for the next steps that require us bringing the different atlases together across organs to build an integrated global human atlas. So the document is organized across 3 sections, and I'll go over every section, including project setup, data integration, and downstream biological queries. Next slide, please. The first chapter focuses on describing key aspects to consider in setting up an Atlas assembly projects. This includes recommendation across how, for example, to assemble the team that should be centered across the BioNetwork and their community, as well as champions across the computational team, for example. We provide recommendation in terms of defining the scope of an atlas, including how to define landmark data set, taking into account diversity and so forth, and data type. We make recommendation on and guidelines on how to proceed with data ingestion and metadata that I just covered, and make recommendation in terms of proceeding with QC filters and batch analysis. Next slide, please. For the second chapter of this document focuses on describing critical aspects to consider for Atlas assembly and evaluating the data integration. Importantly, this section is not meant to be prescriptive. It describes different aspects we ask every team to consider, including defining the integration methods and parameters to be used, defining batch covariates, many of which are provided through our Tier 1 metadata schema that can be used to assess the integration phase, defining style annotations that can be used to evaluate the integration, for example, annotations that are shared across datasets that are not contentious, as well as annotations of rare and transitional cell state that may be harder to capture an integrated object that can be used to benchmark an integrated atlas. Finally, we make recommendation on how to evaluate integration methods using qualitative and quantitative metrics and proceeding with performing the data integration. Ultimately, we ask that every team working on Atlas assembly consider more than one integration methods and perform hyperparameter optimization. provide a justification of why they ended up selecting a particular integration method and parameters, including having considered the different QCs, batch covariates, annotation to assemble and evaluate their atlas. And upon completion, every atlas must be accompanied with the code used to generate the atlas to promote transparency and reproducibility. Next slide, please. Finally, the third chapter provides an overview of strategies for downstream analysis post-data integration, including defining cell population observed, deriving cell annotation rationale, and setting up cell annotation jamborees across bionetwork so that the broad HCA community can actively engage in atlas assembly effort by providing feedback on cell annotation to help derive a consensus annotation framework across tissues. And now I know it was a question around cell annotation, which I'm happy to expand upon at the end of this slides. The document also makes recommendations on strategies for downstream analysis guided by biological queries defined by the bionetwork, as well as sections on steps to be taken to get each atlas approved by the HCA organizing committee. And again, I want to stress that this document is not meant to be prescriptive in the exact methodology that must be followed for atlas assembly. This is meant to provide detailed guidance to the team involved to make sure they meet the atlas approval criteria. This documentation will also help align broad integration strategies across organ system, which will be key for the next phase of HCA that will entail assembling atlases across organ system. This SOP document is expected to be released publicly later this summer, and this will be a living document, and we invite the community to give us feedback so we can continuously improve our documentation to support you all. Our next slide. And so throughout the presentation today, you've heard about different resources that are now available or will be available to our HCA community, some of which are summarized in this slide. We will leave the slide up for a few minutes if some of you want to capture the QR code, but please rest assured that there will be a follow-up message that will have the links to all these resources. And so as promised, we'll have plenty of time to take questions. We have more than 20 minutes to take questions. And I'll invite also Aviv and Sarah back in case there's some specific questions directly to Dan. And so I remember seeing a question about annotation. I can take one first. Someone asked, how can someone participate in cell annotation jamboree? So as part of the atlas approval process for the next phase, every organ system, every bionetwork is invited to organize different form of jamboree to help derive their consensus annotation once they have an integrated object. So one way of engaging with jamborees is to make sure you connect with your bionetwork to stay updated about the progress of atlas assembly. Every bionetwork will be informing the community about their progress, and there will be as well. And so there will be an opportunity to connect, and you'll get to hear about different jamborees in the year to come. The jamboree will be leveraging the cell annotation platform. There will be some forms of jamboree that will be virtual, some will be hybrid, some might be in person, depending on the organ system. And the cell annotation platform will be releasing feedback features later this summer so that you can also give direct feedback on the platform, and we will be releasing demos to instruct people on how to best connect with us. Let's see. It looks like we might have answered all other questions.
Yeah, so we've done a lot of them offline, kind of.
We typed our answers.
Typing, yeah.
Aviv, someone had a question back to your question about managed access. Is the data going to be loaded into a database, data warehouse, stored in S3 buckets or some other places? What's the data stack going to look like? I can also answer that question. Or you want to answer
You go ahead, and I can add if needed.
Yeah. So yes, the data will be stored centrally. We are currently looking and updating where we're going to be storing all the data. So there might be some updates, but accessing the data requires you to go through the managed access process. Maybe Aviv, you want to add to it?
Yeah, I can first of all add just for clarification, because the original question asked whether there was cost
Oh,
associated.
sorry. Yes.
Yeah. That was the originator of the question. So let me separate the two things. First of all, there is no cost for the data per se at all. Managed access is related to ethical considerations that go together with many forms of human data, where you cannot just, post them publicly. A person has to apply for permission. They have to guarantee, actually, at the institutional level, that they would adhere by certain standards and approaches, and then they're granted access, and that access is always conditional. So, for example, after a certain amount of time will pass, they might have to destroy the data. They can't keep copies. There's all sorts of things like that. I do want to say that when you access data on the cloud, there's also charges that go together with data access that have nothing to do with HCA. They have to do with your cloud provider, like egress charges. And how that is handled is a whole other story. When the person, whoever it was, because I can't see the question right now, started asking about the bucket in Amazon, in AWS or another cloud provider, these are other finer details. And today we have particular cloud providers and terms, and those terms can change with time. We cannot stay, I mean, both providers and terms can change with time, but those are not actually costs for the data themselves. They're more computational costs that go together with data. Hopefully that addresses the question. Let me see if I can find it actually and understand the original
I have it, if that helps. The original question was, does
no, I see it. Yeah, he says yes, thanks. So thank you, Arsen. I hope that was helpful to you.
We have another question about Jamboree. Are annotation Jamboree typically virtual or in person? That's an excellent question. Every bio network will tailor their Jamboree to their respective need, depending on the size of their community and how they organize around the world. There should always be a virtual component to help democratize the process. And depending on the scope of it, there might be some in-person event as well. We, beyond the Jamboree effort, we are also implementing follow-up feedback features. So beyond a specific Jamboree event, there will always be an opportunity to continuously give feedback on annotation on this annotation platform. So there's always a chance to engage furthermore. For disease, tissue, and integrating to HCA healthy tissues when uploading data, will there be a discrepancy in what is accepted? I think, I mean, I wanna clarify that the way we're approaching Atlas Assembly is the following. It's not individual contributors submitting data to the ecosystem. This is coordinated through the bio network, and the bio network coordinators with their community must regroup and decide on which data sets they want to prioritize as part of Atlas Assembly. And of course, we have an ongoing Atlas Assembly effort. This is just the beginning. This is not the end. So it's not because a data set is not currently included that it will not be included in the future. But at this point, the group decides on which data set should be included. We are prioritizing healthy references first because it is very key to our mission. And then it is the bio network that prioritizes it. And then it moves forward to the data ecosystem. And so I don't know that there's a discrepancy. It's more about how bio network sets priorities. Aviv, is there any other thoughts?
No, I do not have more to add. I wasn't sure I actually even understood originally the question, but yeah, it's more about priorities, and it also really matters because disease data in some systems is essential even to understand normal systems, for example, in immunology, whereas in other areas, for example, in cancer biology, usually the disease tissue itself, for the purpose of understanding the parenchymal cells of the tissue, is really far off the normal tissue, as I think in cancer is the most substantial example of that. It is true that many studies are combined. They analyze disease and healthy tissue side by side. And so we're quite flexible, I would say, about how we address things. But the atlas itself, its focus is the healthy tissue, not disease tissues, which are much broader scope.
And then there's someone who asked, oh, this was answered. HCA meeting has open abstract submission for posters.
And Christine already
Christine has
answered.
already answered. We will have a poster.
Christine answered, provided the link and when the poster
Wonderful.
abstracts would be due. Yeah.
Yeah.
And we do encourage people to apply, to submit those, because that's a really important part of the meeting.
It's a great way to engage with the community and showcase the work that you're doing and finding ways to connect for the next version of Atlas Assembly by coming and showing your work and meeting new colleagues. Last call for questions.
I think we've
Sarah and Aviv, any concluding thoughts?
I wanted to tell people that I think it's going to be a very exciting year, the rest of 2024 and 2025, both the strong focus on new areas and expansion of areas that were already ongoing, but are really reaching maturity now. Like, for example, spatial mapping. It has been going on for a while, but it is increasingly what we see labs and teams are doing, and that's really important. The integration of the single cell atlases is going very strong, and that also opens up the ability to look across tissues and atlases rather than just within one. So all of those we believe are really important areas. The focus on diversity as well, to expand the diversity in the atlas. And really the atlas is a community effort, so you are the community and your engagement is very important. And looking forward to seeing you in the general meeting.
thank you, everybody. Thank you for coming, and thank you.
And if I may just add a few more things, I think something I certainly don't want to have the last word here. I'll let the co-chair have the last word, but I want to add that there's been incredible effort since the last general meeting in building documentation, standardizing our process. And we are hoping that this documentation will provide more clear guidance on expectation and supporting the community to perform Atlas Assembly and offer clarity. And at any time, if you have any questions about this documentation, remember that these are living documents, and we are welcoming feedback so that we can continuously improve them and help support our community. So thank you all.
No,
And we look forward to seeing you at the general meeting.
Yeah, it's going to be an exciting summer, and see you at the general meeting. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you, everyone.
See
Thank
you.
you.
Bye.
Bye.